Evening, Larry. Am I that readable? I was just thinking. Reminiscing, really. Hang on a sec. Don't look at me like that. I know the rules, but I needed something from my past. I couldn't just leave these letters behind. I wouldn't even be here with you in this place if it wasn't for these letters. Are you sure you want me to read them to you? May give you nightmares. All right. Come here. Settle in, and I'll read them all to you. To whoever finds this, I don't quite know what to call this. I don't even know what to make of this whole situation. It's almost paradoxical. I'm a shambolic mess without a glass in my hand, but the alcohol dulls my mind enough for me to construct adequate sentences to relay what I need to. I had been sober nearly 10 years before I slipped back into the bottle that I now cling to for some semblance of sanity. What was once a major problem in my life is now the only thing giving me courage to get through this. Regardless of what happens to me, at the very least, I can say I did my best to prevent any future incidents and casualties. If you're reading this, I'm sure you've alerted the appropriate authorities upon seeing what I can only imagine will resemble the set of an 80s slasher film. What I'm sure will be bits and pieces of flesh strewn around the cabin is me. A positive ID will undoubtedly be next to impossible due to the fact that there won't be much to identify. So yes, the blood and the guts are what remains of Alex Sherman, the park ranger of these very woods for the last 20-odd years. The woods that I devoted my life to preserving and protecting, becoming one with nature, and ensuring the countless families and explorers were safe and always returned home. Although now, I know I cannot protect anyone. I'm unable to protect myself. Let me start from the beginning, hopefully through my encounters. You, whoever finds this, can make sense of it and find a way to stop it. But first, let me fill my glass again. Time is not on my side, so I'd like to get my fill in while I can. My father grew up in a family that wasn't blessed with an abundance of money or resources, and so as he became his own man, he made a name for himself and worked his way up the corporate ladder to a point that he was now financially comfortable. Providing a loving and comfortable home for his family, my father had the tendency to live vicariously through my brother and I. He always told me stories of how when growing up, he would watch the other kids participating in karate classes, music lessons, and Boy Scouts. So you guessed it, we became virtual projects for dear old Dad, as he enrolled us in these classes and pushed us to excel in them. The karate and music never held my interest much, but the feeling of being a Boy Scout was something I immediately took a shining to. Being out in nature, the clean and fresh air, catching fish and cooking them ourselves was the most rewarding and fulfilling experience. Any possible outing with the scout group, you just knew I would be waiting eagerly at the crack of dawn, bags packed and ready to go on whatever excursion was planned. My brother, Georgie, 3 years my junior, did not share my interest in the outdoors. He was gifted with incredible abilities to pick up any musical instrument and learn how to play it with the most impossible speed. From the tender age of 10, when I first joined the Boy Scouts, I would grow more and more confident in my ability to not only survive, but thrive in the great outdoors. We lived in a fairly rural town. Old colonial buildings accounted for most of the architecture. I guess people didn't have the funds to develop the land much further, or simply didn't see the point in doing so. The lack of progression gave the impression that our lovely little town was almost frozen in time. The nature was undisturbed and grew freely. People saw no reason to cut down trees and demolish the incredible woods and forests that populated our town. As such, as I loved the ease of access of the woods, wandering deeper into nature, the thickets of the forest were truly breathtaking. The immense tree coverage made it virtually impossible to distinguish between night and day. It was seemingly a world of its own. It was my voyage deep into the forest that I stumbled upon it. A deer head lay in a pool of blood, not far off the path which I had walked on. I knew of the food chain, and the fact that animals do of course eat each other. This felt different. Over 6 years in the Boy Scouts gave me an idea of how wildlife can be. A head ripped off of a deer seemed out of the ordinary if it was to be made of a meal. This seemed to me like it was a kill for the sake of primarily just mutilating the animal. As disturbed as I was, I continued down the path. A strange courage washed over me as I felt I had significant enough knowledge to evade or prevent being attacked myself. A little further down the path, I found more of the deer. One of its legs, torn off from the body from the string of tendons and sinew visible, lay next to intestines and other innards of the animal. Whatever had killed the deer seemed to be dropping pieces of it as it moved down the path. The smell of blood and death was something I had never experienced, and my courage soon left as I vomited my lunch into the bushes. Animal mutilation didn't seem possible with a few carnivorous creatures that hid in the depths of the forest. What creature would be vile enough to tear another animal limb from limb and spread the pieces all over as if for some grotesque show? I soon had an answer as I heard the most inhumane sound pierce the quiet chirps and buzzing of the forest. It was a scream that sounded as if every tortured soul in the depths of hell shrieked at the same time. Such was the volume and intensity that it was impossible to estimate just how near or how far the sound came from. My blood froze and my knees gave out. I immediately felt wet as I realized the blood from the massacred deer had steamed all the way up off the path to where I had vomited and promptly collapsed. The scream sounded again, and I could almost feel the sound. Whatever it was felt close. The scream seemed to silence every other creature in the forest. Once the scream had finished, all I could hear was the immense thumping of my heart. A branch snapped from behind me, caused me to jolt and turn. More branches snapped, and my fight or flight response failed me. I stood frozen. A low growl emanated from the direction the bushes snapped, and a low grunt and snarl then sounded. Silence followed. I stood, unsure if I should run or play dead, and hope that the smell of blood I fell into would give the impression it was mine. My ears rang, and I felt deaf as a distinct crack and explosion of a gun being fired rattled the forest. Tears streamed down my face as the fear and confusion overwhelmed me. Another shot was fired from an unknown location. I could see tree bark flying as the projectiles pierced the thicket of trees where the branches had snapped. I lost count of the shots. The distinct sound of branches snapping was clear, as whatever was in the woods sounded as if now heading away from me rather than approaching me from where the snarls were. I was pulled to my feet, and through the tears I saw him. The ranger stood before me, rifle slung over his shoulder, and looking around with purpose as I composed myself. He hurriedly pulled me along the path, back over the deer head, and to the cabin slightly off the path where he was based. After checking me to make sure I wasn't injured, he poured 2 cupfuls of whiskey and proceeded to drink his in its entirety in one gulp. Pouring another, he gestured for me to join him. The whiskey burnt as it went down, but the warmth it provided made me feel slightly more at ease. The Ranger had downed around 4 cups by the time I had finished my first, but I asked for another and tried to drink it at the same manner he had. None of it seemed real. And as the park ranger explained what little he knew of the creature, I felt like I was dreaming. His name tag read Joel, and as Joel told me of the many animal mutilations, brought out a scrapbook that was filled to the brim with sketches and Polaroid pictures. The creatures, drawn by Joel, terrified me. I dreamt of them for years after that first moment I saw them. The red eyes he detailed with artistic perfection seemed to come alive on the pages. The Polaroids were of many torn apart creatures. Guts and intestines draped over branches, stretched across the forest path, decapitated heads with lifeless eyes lying as stones would in the forest. There were dates written on the photos, which he explained to me that whatever this was seemed to live and function in a cycle. He had been a park ranger for 30 years, and in those 30 years, he had experienced 3 cycles of the creature. He had no clue where it came from or went, but it appeared like clockwork every 10 years. There was no known weakness of the creature, but the high-caliber bullets seemed to deter it at the very least. He said that he tried to tell the police and neighboring authorities, but they laughed off the idea of a red-eyed demon slaying wildlife. He knew I believed him because I had heard it. He could see it on my face, that it would forever stay with me. He told me that from his experience, the cycle was at its end, but he would walk me home and continue patrolling the woods until he knew for sure the cycle had ended for now. He didn't seem fazed as to whether or not I wanted to try and tell people about what had happened. He had tried for 30 years and was battling this on his own, so clearly being believed was not of any importance to him. His age showed, made worse by the obvious horrors he had encountered and tried to fight on his own for so long. I finished school the next year, at 18 years of age, and applied to be a park ranger, knowing that I had 9 years to prepare and learn from Joel, as best as I could, to take up the mantle and protect the town from whatever this was. I hoped that the 2 of us as a team could do what Joel had been attempting alone for the last few decades. Joel tried his best to discourage me from joining his fight. It was almost as if he knew it was an impossible battle, and there was no possible positive outcome. When he saw my resolve and determination to help him, he welcomed me into the cabin with a Remington 700 rifle and a bottle of Jack Daniels, 2 staples to survive and stay sane in the forest alone, according to Joel. With 9 years to learn from Joel and conduct a plan of action, I felt almost eager for the time to elapse. Being a park ranger was incredible, but I couldn't fathom how exhilarating it would be to rid the woods of the creature and save countless lives of people and animals alike. Having lived through the harrowing ordeal and being saved by Joel, we bonded almost instantly. He was like a father, teacher, and friend, all rolled into one. The first and by far easiest lesson I learned was how incredible whiskey was. From being a timid sipper, I soon became proficient in the art of drinking hard liquor and was able to hold my own against my superior. Even with a blood alcohol level to rival a sailor, Joel and I went deep into the woods each day to hone my ability with his trusty Remington. The first few times I felt the pressure associated with learning a new skill, but liquid courage is a real thing, and I found that for each tumbler of whiskey I ingested, it settled my nerves to the point that shooting became second nature. By this time, I had pretty much moved out of my parents' house and resided on a cot in the living room of Joel's cabin in the woods. I found that with my focus and my enjoyment on the task at hand, I barely thought of my family back home. Joel became my family. It wasn't long after we began my in-depth training that Joel solemnly sat down one evening and asked I join him across the fire. The shadows cast over his face as the fire danced around seemed to age Joel by decades. I could see the exhaustion and defeat written clearly across his face. I sat down and was shocked to see there was no tumbler or glass in my mentor's hand. He clasped them tightly together, something I had seen him do to prevent the trembles I had witnessed many times before. I couldn't say whether the shakes stemmed from alcohol abuse or the magnitude of horrors he had encountered throughout his tenure. For the first time, in I don't know how long, I felt thoroughly unsettled and uncomfortable. Joel had never really opened up to me, and that night, he had decided to bare his soul. I gulped whiskey throughout his talk, but none of the liquid gold seemed to warm my insides as Joel recounted his experience with a cold and detached voice. I came to learn that Joel had actually been a family man. He had worked a job with the park conservationist and grew bored of the countless hours behind a desk when he could be out in the wild, actively being involved with the nature he had devoted his life to protect. When Joel first started out, there was no actual park ranger position. A couple of more outdoor-inclined people within the office take turns spanning the cabin in the woods, ensuring hunters do not try their luck in the off-season, as well as making sure no forest fires were started or kids went missing. Joel approached the higher-ups and put forward the idea that one man to lead the good fight seemed more beneficial, as they would learn the forest in its entirety and have a better grasp of any issues that may be faced. His idea was accepted, and before he could apply to be the one to fill the position, he was given a cool-looking ranger hat and a jacket with Park Ranger stitched onto the sleeve. From that day on, decades ago, Joel was the man in charge of the woods, the protector and savior of the natural habitat. His wife and toddler moved into the cabin with him, and he was ready to begin his new job. He told me his wife didn't really have a penchant for the woods. She expressed her dissatisfaction with moving, but ultimately, she gave in and moved to support his new role. It was at this point that Joel told me that he wished he had listened to his wife. She didn't have to move into the cabin with him, but he wanted his wife by his side as he reveled in the accomplishment of being a new park ranger. Pulling out the box with the Polaroids, Joel laid pictures of desecrated animals across the table, all marked with the dates the pictures had been taken. He explained that not many years after he first took the job, heard that demonic scream and saw victim number 1. The picture had the old estate, and caught on film was a pile of blood and animal meat. I couldn't discern what the creature was, but Joel assured me it was a deer. There was nothing in the picture to confirm this. My stomach turned at the sight of how badly shredded and obliterated the alleged deer was. It looked as if the animal had been put through a wood chipper and then diced up for good measure. Joel explained he had heard the scream in the late afternoon. When he had went to investigate, he was greeted by the vile sight he had photographed. He assumed it was some sick group of people that enjoyed animal mutilation, as the trees and leaves had been sprayed by the life leaving the animal's body. Nothing looked even relatively eaten, so it had to be sadists simply committing an unspeakable act to the animal. Joel soon learned that it was, in fact, an animal of some kind that had done this, as while he was taking the pictures of the mess, he heard that soul-snatching scream echo from the direction of the cabin. The sight in the cabin easily eclipsed the horror Joel had found in the woods. The tears in his voice drew a stark parallel to the anger I could hear in his voice. I found myself unable to look at him as he continued with his story. Thankfully, Joel spared me the grotesque details of the tragedy that befell his family. Having seen photographs of the animals that had crossed this creature's path, I felt I had a good understanding of what Joel had seen. Throughout my time knowing Joel, we had discussed what we thought the creature was numerous times. He had recounted many occasions where he happened upon dismembered animals and even seen the creature's burning red eyes. But through all the theory, stories, and encounters, not once had he mentioned his family. I don't know why I never thought to ask, but in hindsight, I'm extremely glad that I never brought it up. I sat silent after hearing that jaw-dropping story. I stared down intently at my drink, swirling the brown liquid as the fire crackled and jumped. I'll remember the words that followed from Joel up until the day I die. Pulling out another Polaroid shot that was folded and tucked into his wallet, he told me, "I don't hunt this beast because I'm a good person. I hunt it because I want it to pay for what it did to my family." I was shocked. More so that at the beginning of the story, Joel picked up the bottle of the whiskey as he lumbered towards his room. I saw him raise a burly hand to his face as he walked away, undoubtedly wiping away tears after recounting the most tragic day of his life. He grunted a good night to me and left me sitting, gazing at the fire, with a grotesque image of his torn-apart family replaying in my mind. I mumbled my goodnight back and finished my whiskey in a long gulp. The next day, suffice it to say, I was even more dialed in and focused on the gun training. Joel felt like family to me, and so hearing that the people he cared about were so gruelly taken made my drive to slay the creature grow tenfold. Accompanying the weapon training was tracking and survival, both imperatives to staying alive in the woods, especially when the creature cycles begin. We worked hard, every single day, and it showed. I devoured the skills and knowledge with unmatched greed. I was determined to surpass Joel's skills and ensure that this creature never harmed anything ever again. I know I am rambling, but I never had the chance to convince anyone that what Joel and I prepared to fight was indeed a very real threat. It felt good to finally be able to speak my mind and lessen the mental emotional burden. My training went exceedingly well, and I became more and more proficient as the years flew by. Time seemed to have been warped, as I never actually realized just how much time had passed. I snapped back to reality when I saw Joel start shaking again. When I asked him what the matter was, he looked at me with an incredible mix of anger and fear, and immediately, I knew we had come full circle, and the cycle of the creature was upon us. All the years of preparation and training seemed futile as I felt my blood run cold and an impending sense of doom lingered over me. "It's bound to start any day now soon, son," Joel had told me as he removed the rifles and accompanying ammunition from the gun safe. Not even 3 days later, we heard the demonic scream that seemed to be the signal that the nightmare was set to begin. We walked around the woods the next morning, and sure enough, we found an almost exact replica of the meat pile from Joel's photography collection. Rather than walk around and be vulnerable, we decided that establishing a plan was our best option to stay alive. Due to the lack of knowledge surrounding the senses this creature possessed, hiding in shrubbery near the bait would be risky. We would bind the deer in place on various paths throughout the woods. The creature seemed to emit this treacherous sound every time it murdered, and so we would most likely hear when it took our bait. We would then rush to the point of the massacre and hope the two of us were competent enough shooters to blow this creature's head off. As we discussed the plan, I felt the fear diminish and be replaced by slight excitement to kill this beast. With the deer in place, we returned to the cabin and bolstered our courage with the nectar of the gods. Not a word was spoken as we sat waiting for even the slightest sound to travel through the woods. Joel held his whiskey in one hand and the picture of his family in the other. almost as if we were in sync. With the last sip of Joel's glass, a scream pierced the silence. Joel leapt up, and I seemed to be physically drawn to follow him, as I was off the couch and running to the rifles, as we lay in wait without even thinking about it. The pounding of my heart in my ears seemed to deafen me, and I was completely sure that the sound of my rushing blood would prevent me from hearing if the creature screamed again. Before we reached the clearing where we had stationed the deer, the scream sounded yet again, but it didn't sound like it was up ahead, rather running through the thicket of trees around us. Joel came to an abrupt stop as he heard it, and I followed suit. "Be on the ready," I was told. Swiveling in place, almost back to back, I spotted the devilish red eyes. From the darkness of the abyss that surrounded us, the red glow shone brighter than anything I had ever seen before. The courage, hope, and excitement I felt left me exponentially. The rifle felt like a tree trunk in my hand. I thought for a moment I was going to drop it, which would be the equivalent of signing my own death warrant. I stammered random syllables to Joel, but he was already well aware of the hunter that had bypassed our plans. Still shocked to my core, and thinking of many ways in which the situation I was in would be my last, I was ripped out of it by the deafening crack of Joel's projectile flying towards the red eyes. I had always thought Joel as a sharpshooter, but I saw his bullet smash against the tree near where the eyes were. "Don't just stand there, shoot!" Joel screamed at me. My shot was worse than Joel's, and I could not see where the bullet went at all. We both rushed to reload the guns, all the while hoping the beast wouldn't burst through the trees and shred us. Just as quickly as the eyes appeared, they were gone before we had finished reloading. We stood dead still, guns at the ready. I'm not sure if we stood still to keep quiet, or if we were so petrified we were paralyzed from fear. Almost as if mocking us, the death scream once again sounded off, but this time, it came from the thicket behind us. We turned as soon as we heard the sound, but we were too slow. Joel dropped to the ground with a scream, and it took me a few seconds to realize that the creature had taken the offensive and bit clean through Joel's leg. I fired my gun out of pure instinct and hit the creature in the neck as it was hunched over my teacher. The bullet clearly bothered it, but by no means did enough damage to stop it. The creature slowly rose and turned towards me. I stand at 6'2", and yet felt dwarfed by this monster before me. I couldn't make out the top of its head, but I could see its face clearly. I had never seen such incredible teeth. They appeared to be longer than my hand, and came to such prominent points that they looked handcrafted for slicing through flesh. I would imagine the teeth were white, but thanks to Joel's disembowelment, they were now a deep crimson color. Blood drenched its muzzle, and the burning red eyes pierced my soul. This creature looked as if it had stepped off a set of a horror movie, a gross combination of a man and wolf. It took a colossal step towards me, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. I wanted to cry, the realization that this was to be the day I'd die a horrific death. The very ground seemed to shake with one step of the creature. I jumped with fear as yet another crack resonated through the woods. Joel had managed to hit the beast in the head, with its head jolted forward suddenly. "Get out of here, Alex!" Joel shouted, as the creature once again turned its attention towards him. "It's too late for me. I'll keep you here as long as I can. Go to the car and get as far away from here as you can." I didn't even say anything back. Instinct drove me once again, and I was running at full speed without so much as a second thought. I heard another shot followed by shouting and screaming. Tears began to blur my vision as I imagined what was being done to Joel. I couldn't make him scream like that. I got home and locked the door. It was habit more than anything. The creature could clearly get through the piddly little door. I took the shotgun from the gun safe and ensured the gun was loaded and ready. Within what seemed like minutes after retrieving the shotgun, the monster once again screamed. That meant Joel was no more, and the creature was no longer preoccupied. I don't think I have any chance of survival. Even in a car, the creature moves at impossible speeds through the woods, and so it would undoubtedly catch me. That's why I wrote this note, inasmuch as it is a warning about what is hunting in these woods. It is also an obituary of sorts for Joel. He worked endlessly to save people's lives and received not one thank you. So I hope that you, whoever finds this, can grant him the appreciation he deserves. I wish I could tell you more. I wish I could give you answers on how to defeat this beast. I hate to say it, but this thing must be an actual devil. I don't think anything could be done about it. The woods are its hunting grounds. Nothing can make it leave. Take the Polaroids and spread them around town to warn people and encourage them to stay as far away from the woods as possible. I don't have much time before it gets to me. Hopefully I'll manage to finish the whiskey at the very least. Good luck. Your Park Ranger, Alex Sherman. This has been The Ranger Files, Part 1, written by Alexander Hickey and narrated by Naomi Richards. Join us next month for Part 2 in this bonus series, The Ranger Files. See you soon, dear traveler.